So this is pretty typical. Usually I'm the last one to sing karaoke, and the crowd's about this thin. I'm really happy I actually get this opportunity at an innovation forum to speak. And what I'm really happy about is my co-presenter, Anisa, being here today. Forbo's been very active. We're a flooring company, very active with the USGBC. We're a charter member, and I'm proud of that fact. And what I'm going to give you guys right now is hopefully a perspective of a manufacturer of why health matters. So one of our largest market segments is K-12. From a perspective of what we see, just some very topical things. And again, this is from a manufacturer's view. We talk about 1/3 of the US population spending so much time in K-12 buildings. So roughly 50 million K-12 students, about 20 million higher ed, and 15 million staff, faculty support in these buildings. The U.S. expended in these buildings roughly $550 billion in what was referred to as the bond era. So from between 1995 and 2007, we saw this explosive growth of spending in schools. So from a manufacturer's perspective, the market was ripe. We have products that are sustainable, and I'm going to define that a little bit. But from an opportunistic standpoint, manufacturers make money how? Selling product. So we took our products to market, and a lot of sustainability is built in a boardroom. And when I say that, it's marketing campaigns. It's looking at the difference between a sustainable product or a sustainable attribute. And now we're in this next phase. Everyone I met with this week, or I should say in the last couple of days, has talked about these massive bonds that once again have been passed, these large school districts, which they're funding again very, very large renovation and construction. And one of the reasons for that is there's 88,000 approximately schools, K-12, that were all built in the 50s and 60s. And the current state of these schools is what you guys are dealing with right now. So we're looking at complete new construction and a lot of renovation work. So once again, from a manufacturer's perspective, it's opportunity. At some point, we faced deferred maintenance. We walked into a lot of schools that had that floor right there. You guys have it in your buildings. It's the taboo word. It's VAT. So now you're faced with, well, what do we do with it? Do we encapsulate it? Do we consider removing it and go through an abatement process? We're talking about this again. So from that perspective, from manufacturers, we started to look at how does deferred maintenance add up? What does that mean? How does that happen? Do we get to this point? And now how is it addressed? So a big question is, are our schools making us sick? Now again, Anisa and I are the last presenters today, but a topic that hasn't been discussed too much is health. We talk a lot about energy. We talk a lot about money. Money triggers everything. It's the root of what we do. But at the same time, we look at what is our purpose? How can we have an effect on our students, our staff, our parents in these buildings that are getting more and more used today? We have very, very high expectations of our facilities. And what are these buildings actually creating? What are these environments? So according to the US EPA, at least half of the 53 million students and 5 million staff could be exposed to polluted air, lead, asbestos, chemical fumes, pesticides, and a big one is the dreaded mold and mildew. So today we're seeing these chemicals of concern. So some of them, PVCs. It's a big topic right now. It's a buzzword. As a flooring manufacturer, we make PVC products. We make a lot of alternate products. And I want to state right here, what drives innovation is market demand. And with that, when you look at products that come out initially, there's a perception that if we're going to build green or sustainable or try to make a healthy building, we're going to have to spend a lot more. And initially, that's that incubation period. And I remember my first, mobile phone was in a bag. And fortunately, it cost my company $1,000 for that phone, so I could be accessible all the time. And today I have this device that's 1,000 times more efficient and can do so much more, and that phone's $99. Well, why? The market drove innovation, And technology, in order to compete, required more and more manufacturers to get into the game. And when that happens and the market becomes more competitive, manufacturers figure out ways to make technology better and to provide more for truthfully less. So it's those initial step-offs that you find very high price for a new technology or what have you. So from a flooring perspective, you're seeing more and more opportunities now where manufacturers are getting more competitive. They're realizing if you want to compete in the health game, and it's healthcare and education are the biggest markets, you better have products that are going to meet the demands and the requirements of the end user or the customer. So you're starting to see, one, an influx of more products with sustainable attributes, but also costs are starting to become competitive or even go down. You're seeing, as I said, safer and more cost-effective alternatives start to hit the market. So making strides forward. This is a Capistrano school district, another aspect of health in a school. Again, this was a study that was done. This room, as you can see, a lot of daylighting. And in Capistrano, in California here, when they did this study, they found by comparing rooms with what they called extreme daylight versus those with very, very poor daylighting, they had 20% increase in test scores on math and 26% on their reading tests. This was an effect of just good design and looking at how do we build a healthier environment where we can get more productive students and tests. So how do we get there? This is an interesting analogy. So I watch what I eat. I've never smoked. I'm a healthy guy. I had double bypass surgery 2 years ago. How does it happen? Well, one thing I can tell you is I really, really monitor now what I eat. And the way I do that is via a nutrition label. So I'm happy that they don't put it on Tito's, but when they eventually do, I know exactly what I'm consuming. And as a consumer, I have a choice. So for me, my buzzwords are sodium, fat, and calories. But I'm able to know what I'm putting in my body. Well, when it comes to building products, there's been a long period where you based a lot of your decisions based on what a manufacturer like me told you. So maybe you were looking for that certain sustainable attribute, and I said, oh, I can give you that. Or you said, hey, we're looking for some green flooring material. And I said, I have this amazing product. It's green. It comes in a recycled cardboard box. Well, how does that make the product green? You guys recycle cardboard to ship it in? Yeah, it's got an attribute. So with that, there's been a real push over the last probably 10 years, and I think Anisa will expand on this much more, of how do we simplify the process of product decisions for an architect, for a school district, for a healthcare system. And the way is by having labeling and by having the ability to compare one product to another, but all based on the same translation or nutrition label. So one of the things that we learned is we talk about EPDs and HPDs. So an EPD is an environmental product declaration. And what these were built on is really the environmental characteristics or how these process elements of a product have these impact categories. So the impact categories that you see up there in very fine print, like abiotic depletion or eutrophication, which is does the product in its either production, use, or end of life create an algae bloom when we dispose of it? It has to have a lot of nitrogen in it. Global warming potential. So the original EPD, which for my product category is flooring, was viewed and peer-reviewed by the Resilient Floor Covering Institute, and the decision was made that that's how we're going to be able to compare products. But the one thing that was missing is we never looked at how does it affect the ecosystem, or more importantly, human toxicity. So the product's great, and I know that it's not creating an algae bloom and it's not having a lot of global warming potential, but what is its effect on these kids in my school? And we never had that measurement until the HPD came out, which is a health product declaration, which now adds in human and ecotoxicity. So it gives you a measurable way to compare products and what are their effects. So as I said earlier, you're seeing a rapid growth over the last 10 to 15 years of chronic illness, especially in kids with asthma, ADHD, a lot of various things happening, and you can attribute it to diet, to environment, to what's going on at home, or are we just detecting things easier or better today than we did years ago? but the ability to really look at what are we making our buildings out of? What is this environment that people are spending a third of their day in or time? And are we adding to that or contributing to that health potential risk? So today, with warning labels, we're starting to see things such as that Disney in California, Disneyland, they let you know when you're walking in. So this is the big Prop 65 in California with LEED. It's really neat to be able to have that plaque on the front of your facility that you're a LEED silver or gold or a platinum institution or building. It's that nutrition label. So for us as a product manufacturer to be able to compare and benchmark, it drives us to improve. I'll give you guys an example. We make PVC flooring, as I said, but by having an HPD for our products, health product declaration, one of the things we realize is we need to get better. So one of those was a true endocrine disruptor called phthalate. And what it is when you make a vinyl product, like a book bag, a binder, window shades, floor covering, wall covering, you add plasticizer to make it flexible. So you can bend it and it doesn't snap, to make it more easy to install, durable. Well, plasticizers contain a lot of phthalates, and phthalates, as I said, are known endocrine disruptors, which relate to a lot of reproductive issues, some mental health issues. So as a company, Forbo made a decision that we need to figure out technologically how do we remove phthalate from PVC, and ultimately how do we become non-PVC altogether. So again, the market push drives a manufacturer to innovate. So how do we reach a path to compliance? These are some of the labels that are starting to occur. So this is for Forbo, a product we have called Marmoleum. That's an HPD. It's a published document that's on our website, that's available. You see things like Declare from Pharos, the health product declarations, Red List Free with the Living Building Institute. The nutrition labels are here. They're happening, and it's giving you an easier way to really view and monitor and look at products and make more educated decisions, not just based on what a sales rep said, yeah, my product's green. So some buzzwords. Focus on natural alternatives when they're available. Replace products that add to the problem with ones that actually can reduce risk naturally. So a big one today is with pesticides, with pest management systems. In my industry, the elimination of waxing and stripping floors. So everybody talks about, the maintenance-free floor. I can tell you two things. One, the maintenance-free floor doesn't exist. And two, if it did, I'd be retired. All floors have to be cleaned. What does exist is the ability to eliminate the waxing and stripping cycle that you see. And it is a burden on the environment, and it's a burden on your budget, and it does exist. The difficulty is training that custodial staff that's been doing it for, and the buzzword is 30 years, of a different way to maintain your schools. Create healthier and educational environments. You can design and specify safe, healthy, indoor quality environments. Examine alternatives, look for natural payoffs, and don't miss those easy opportunities. And that's me on my soapbox with the boots I normally wear. And so I'm happy to introduce Anisa. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Thanks for sticking around. So I'm Anisa Hemming. I'm with the Center for Green Schools, or with the U.S. Green Building Council. I'm going to dive right in because we've got a lot to talk about. These are three parts of my presentation here. We're going to talk about an overview of what makes a healthy learning environment. Then we're going to go through some new research to help you understand what we know now about health and the way that students learn. And then I'm going to leave you with some things that you might be able to do with that information within your school systems. So before I get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about what USGBC does. The U.S. Green Building Council is a council, so it's 11,000 member organizations and companies who got together 25 years ago to define what we mean by a green building, to make sure that when we say green, we're actually backing that up with some understanding of what we're talking about. We have about 200 of those members who are K-12 schools and districts. Does anyone in here know that if they're a member? Okay, so those members, oh yeah. So those members get together and vote on the LEED rating system. Members serve on committees to define what the rating system says. It's a very volunteer committee-driven process, consensus-based standard. So, and that standard is LEED. So this is what we're best known for. So this is, I bring this up because this is the lens that I use to look at what we mean by sustainability and green. The categories of LEED are location and transportation, sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, and indoor environmental quality. So when I talk about green, this is what I'm talking about when it comes to the built environment. So this is me, if you can tell. This is me in New Orleans. So I was hired by USGBC a little over 10 years ago to work on the rebuilding of the schools after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So I worked in the Capitol office for the Recovery School District in Louisiana, and I was hired to work on their green building standards. And what I ended up doing is writing a grant to the EPA to hire an indoor air quality manager. They used to have money for things like that. And I hired her, and she was the one that was going around to different schools. She was a toxicologist. She was visiting schools, trying to understand what the situation was for their indoor air quality in particular. And she's the one who really brought me to understand the impact of the work that we were doing at the district. So I hadn't been in a learning environment that looked like this before. This is not telling our children what we want them to hear from us. And so this experience of going around to these schools with her actually is what still motivates me to do this work. What we do in making environments that are inspiring for kids to learn in, healthy for kids to learn in, is really important, and it says something to them about the hope that we have for their future. So all of that is the background of what I bring to this work in green schools. I wanted to say very quickly what the Center for Green Schools is working on right now with bringing the green building industry into schools and green building professionals into schools. We're using our ARC sustainability benchmarking platform that explains how your school environment is doing on sustainability day to day to explain to students and teachers the what of sustainability. And then we've got this great curriculum platform called Learning Lab to explain the why any of that matters. There's a dozen partners, 600 lessons within that platform, all around sustainability topics. And then we're using our Green Apple Day of Service, which is an international day of service, to explain what you can do about it, so how to affect those components of the learning environment. So just wanted to let you know that really quickly. So let's get into what is a healthy learning environment. So this graphic comes from a report from Harvard School of Public Health. We worked with them on a paper compiling all the research that was out there at the time, looking at the health and learning environment. So this just explains sort of the progression of our understanding. So there's a lot of studies that just look at one of these ways of looking at health, but they really all feed into each other. And I don't need to read those to you. You can understand what we are talking about there. So if you feel well, you can think well. If you think well, you can test well or perform academically well. So I look at health in the built environment in four different components. Healthy indoor environment, physical activity, and what I mean by this when it comes to the built environment is how the built environment encourages physical activity. Exposure to nature, this has an impact on our health and well-being. Our connection to the natural world has been shown to help us with productivity, keeps people engaged and alert. And then the way that the built environment provides tools for our educators to teach students about nutrition and health and food. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about a healthy learning environment. So let's look at some new research and some compilations of research that has been going on for the last 25 years. This is that paper I talked about before from Harvard School of Public Health. This was released in 2016, but it's still the most recent compendium that we have of research on school health, and it's also written in a way that any of us can understand, which is really nice when they do that. So they looked at a couple hundred studies related to health in the built environment, especially related to schools and kids, and there's some really useful conclusions in here. You can see the symbols are aligned with that graphic before of feeling well, thinking well, and performing well. One of the clearest lines that we have on indoor environments and effect on student performance is on CO2 levels in the classroom. Carbon dioxide, the higher it gets, the sleepier we get, the harder it is to think, the harder it is to do critical problem solving, all of that, and that's very clear in the research. It's probably the clearest thing that we know can impact students' ability to learn. CO2 is also a proxy for other things. So if CO2 is high in a classroom, the chances are that the air is sort of stagnant and that other toxins are rising as well. So if you're worried about formaldehyde in schools, if you're worried about VOCs, all of that rises as CO2 rises because the air is just sort of stagnating there and all that off-gassing is just staying in the room. We also have pretty clear research on temperature and humidity impacts. The hotter the classroom, the harder it is to focus. Really interesting conclusions about humidity that I didn't know. If you've got a really humid gym, there's some increased incidence of respiratory problems, which I didn't realize that until this paper came out. We also know that noise, it's not just annoying, it also has an impact on our physical health, so high blood pressure, that kind of thing. And this is especially important for school siting because near airports and highways, this can be a real problem. The other thing that we can keep in mind as we design schools is that acoustics from background noise and also from noise transfer from room to room can actually really, if we do something about that during the construction of our schools, we can really help with this issue of students not being able to hear their teachers and also just kind of noise annoyance. The other thing besides CO2 that probably is the strongest link that we know for health and the built environment is daylight. So it's very clear understanding of what daylight does to our stress hormones, our cortisol levels, and also to melatonin, which is the hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles. So if students don't have access to daylight, those hormones can kind of get out of whack, and that does not help with their ability to focus and retain information in the classroom. So daylight is also one of those things that we just know really well what's going on there. So there's this new batch of research that is coming out. The EPA awarded 7 teams of university scientists research dollars about 3 years ago to study health in the learning environment, and those studies are coming out now. So you can either go to this incredibly boring website that the EPA has, or we're working with the EPA right now to translate that research into something that all of us can use in designing and operating schools. So working on it. That research is very exciting to people like me who really want more to back up the work in healthy schools and to help us understand what actual strategies to use for that. The results so far from the EPA grantees are just a couple of early nuggets for you, sneak peek, if you will. So we are seeing that schools are not doing well when it comes to keeping up with CO2 levels. It's conservative to say that half of our classrooms are over the recommended level of CO2. One of the studies found that only a fifth of the classrooms were within the recommended levels of CO2. So this is a really persistent problem. If you think you might have an issue with ventilation and outdoor air flow, you probably do. If you don't think you have a problem with that, you probably do. So something to really look at. And the equipment to monitor CO2 is actually relatively cheap when it comes to air quality monitoring. So we're seeing the importance with school siting, not just for noise, like I talked about before, but also for like ambient pollution. This is a really interesting finding. One of the groups saw that VOCs from materials like what Eric was talking about, off-gassing from materials, and also formaldehyde goes up when the air is stagnant, we know. So what is great about the findings from this study is that we can actually do something about it. So if you turn on the HVAC at least an hour or so before teachers and kids are going to be in that classroom, you can actually do something about those VOC and formaldehyde levels in the classroom. This is one of the things that we want out of studies like this. We want solutions that we can pass on. So we're getting some of that from this research. We found that there's some really surprising elements to what's causing background noise, where VOCs are coming from, all kinds of things like that. So this is just to say it might not be what you expect, and getting into schools and asking questions is one way to find out. And then finally, an interesting nugget from this research is that our drive as people who run facilities to get filters changed regularly and make sure that that's happening is worth it, which is really, really important to know, because it looks like asthma incidence is actually caused by the larger particles in the air, the sort of larger size particles, which are the size particles that can be captured by filtration. So it's just one more way to communicate to your custodians and your maintenance staff about how important it is to make sure that our filtration is working in schools, because it actually does have a very clear impact on asthma incidence. All right, so what can you do with some of this information? I've broken this down into things that you can act on when you go to your schools, things you can communicate with your staff about, and then things that you can advocate to your leadership or to others about. So getting right into it. So as we heard from Eric, which was a great overview, specifying products in construction, in renovation, that are declaring what their product elements are, their ingredients are, is really important, and it's also becoming way easier. The LEED rating system, the most current version of LEED is LEED version 4, and there's a little tweak to that rating system coming out this fall called V4.1. If anybody's really into the LEED world, you'll know. So LEED version 4 was the version that brought forward environmental product declarations and health product declarations as the way to demonstrate responsibility when it comes to specifying products. So they're a really great way of finding products that do this is through UL has a SPOT database. Has anybody used that in your work? Okay, it's really new, but it's got 45,000 products in it, and it tells you what they comply with. So you can search by type of product, and then you can find products that comply with different green attributes and environmental attributes. So that's something to keep in mind with that. The other thing to keep in mind for design and construction is this connection with daylight and performance. Super important for our kids. In operations, does anybody do you know if you have an indoor air quality management plan? Who's got one of those? Anybody? Okay, we got one. So the EPA has a Tools for Schools program. About 50,000 schools or so are using that program, so it's pretty well respected. And it's just general guidance on like how to establish an indoor air quality management plan, who should be responsible for what kind of things should you be watching out for in your schools, that kind of thing, because if we don't know what the problems are in the schools, then we can't fix them, clearly. One of the ways that we can have an effect on toxins is through pesticides and cleaning chemicals are most common sources for those harmful chemicals in our schools. So Tools for Schools and other guidance helps you understand how to limit the exposure to your students from those. A couple of ideas for how to communicate about health in the built environment. I always see kind of smiles when I say this first one. I worked in a school district. I know that asking for feedback from people about the learning environment is a little scary, but also can lead to like confrontation in some cases. But if we don't know, I mean, teachers and students know what's happening in their classrooms, and if they don't feel like they can communicate that to us in the facilities side, then they're either gonna let things stagnate or they're gonna try to problem solve on their own, and we know how that goes. So that's something to think about, like what are the feedback mechanisms back to you about the learning environment from the classrooms. If we don't have a mechanism for that that's really easy for them to use, then they just won't tell us what's happening. We have a couple of resources for training. The Green Classroom Professional Certificate is specifically designed for classroom teachers and for custodians to understand the impact that they have on their immediate environment. So it's focused on environment, it's focused on like health in their classroom or their school environment and what they can do to affect that. It's an online course, 12 modules. You can go in and out of it. It's very accessible and easy. And then another tool for you is the Green Associate Credential, and this is a credential that USGBC administers, and it's about green building, and it would be a good option for like people on a Capitol building team who you want to have some kind of familiarity with green building concepts and health. And then finally, when you probably don't think of yourself as an advocate, but you know that you do advocate for the resources for your department. And so we, USGBC Center for Green Schools, are happy to help you with that advocacy. If we can do anything to translate the research that exists into reasons why you need the resources you need to do the work that you need to do, we're happy to help you do that. So please contact me if you need that. And then we have community advocates in all of your areas who care about green building, and they are often like the most practical advocates out there because they work in the building industry. They know what some of the things that you deal with are. For instance, we just released a paper yesterday looking at state laws related to lead testing in school drinking water, analyzing those state laws, and there are only 15 states in the District of Columbia that have laws related to lead testing. And the laws, it's very clear which ones actually took into account the resources that districts had to work with and which ones didn't. And we want to advocate to other states for laws related to lead testing, but we want to do it in a way that actually gives districts the resources they need to do the work and make sure that they're keeping their kids healthy. So we can be a partner, and any of the advocates that are looking at health and children in your area, as long as they know that your intentions are similar to theirs, they can be really strong partners for you. So it's an honor to be the final speaker for you guys today because it means I get to leave you with some thought. And I wanted to leave you with the way that the Center for Green Schools thinks about our work in education. We think about education as painting a future. Every time you educate a child, you are choosing a future that you want because you're educating them for that future. So through the educational process, you're choosing that. And so what we like to think about is, okay, if that's true, then what is the world that I want to act to create? Because that's what we're doing in education. So I invite you to think about what it looks like to have a healthy world, one that is good for people, good for the natural environment, and then what does that mean for your everyday actions? What does that mean for what you might do tomorrow in your district? Does that change anything thinking about education through that lens? So thank you very much. We have like a minute.
we have a few minutes for a couple questions, if there are any, for Anisa. Yes.
First of all, I want to preface my question with saying that I appreciate and totally agree with safe, environmental, sustainable architecture, design, products, the whole thing. It is the way to think. It is the way to go. Having said that, I would whittle it to the question, has USBC and products and manufacturers thought about, within our district, we try new products, innovative products, paints, caulks, adhesives, floorings and stuff, trying to be as responsible towards what you're speaking on your presentation. At the same time, we do experience a percentage of failure. We've heard from trades and such, well, they don't make products today as good as they used to be. So we've had failure with adhesives, with vinyl base, with flooring, with low VOCs, painting, with caulking, shrinking things, where we didn't have that in the past. Prime example is the big no-no that Eric brought up, VAT and its adhesive, bad, bad, only bad. However, I'm told by trades in history, and people have been around for many decades, it stays, it works, it lasts. So there's a discussion in all this going to sustainable, good design, responsible, healthy design products is to balance with things that actually have longevity and that last.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are products that don't work regardless of what they say for the environment and health, right? There are a couple ways that I could talk about that. I mean, we coordinate a network of sustainability directors, energy and sustainability directors in school districts around the country. So I hear a lot about, it's about 200 people. So I hear a lot about like ways that people have tried new products. And I would say that there are definitely some instances where products don't perform in the way that is expected, and that's why we try to start with pilot projects with new products, and you guys do that anyway. What we've also seen is that some trades and some maintenance personnel don't believe that the product will work, and without seeing whether it does work. And so one of the really cool process that Grand Rapids Public Schools tried to implement with green cleaning was they actually they bought like samples of a ton of different green cleaning products and then had their maintenance staff sort of became the experts on the products as they were testing them, and they would have multiple people test the products in the schools and then like rate them, and then they got them all together and like talked about which ones were better and worse. And so there was some engagement with the trades on trying to find a greener product that would work. So that it's not always possible with new building products. Like you need to put a sealant in, right? Like you can't just pilot a bunch of sealants and then see which one works. But with products that are used in operations, that's a really strong strategy, is like actually getting your maintenance staff to be the experts that are leading the change to find better products.
We're in a struggle right now with people that have always done things certain ways. So for us in the flooring industry, there's an installation, I should say a dearth of installation right now, that it's just very difficult for us even to find sub-trades of installers. And the ones that are out there, many of which are retiring, that weren't typically looked at as guys that stuck stuff to floors. They were mechanics. They were craftsmen. They really knew how to work with products and make it work. The adhesive technologies today are actually more advanced. But, my analogy for this is we're trying to train these people to do something different. And there's two built-in excuses. One is when you guys hear the word change or different, it means dollars. It's going to cost more. Any change you make ends up costing more. And the second, change means something I have to do differently, so I have a built-in excuse if it doesn't work. And my analogy is this. I really want to get my wife a Tesla, but I know she'll figure out a way to put gas in it. And why? Because it's different. It's not what she's accustomed to. And this is what we face. A very quick example. We have what's called a wet set adhesive for our flooring material. It's different than how VAT and VCT and LVT have been installed for the last 60 years or 70 years. You don't let the adhesive dry. You put the flooring into it while it's wet. And we go on multitudes of complaints where the adhesive is dried and the installer looks at you and says, no, we did it by the book. We followed your directions. Well, the floor is not even adhered. And I had a conversation with one of you earlier today, but this is what we try to face, so we do more advanced training programs. Again, we're trying to, and I apologize for this term, idiot-proof the installation. We have to realize that at times it's going to go in someone's hands that's not going to be maybe that proficient or that interested in really learning something new. So as manufacturers, we're trying to simplify with floating floors and floors that don't even require adhesive or spray adhesives and simplify the process. But the technology is there. It's just trying to get people to do something different.
All right, Anisa Hemming, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all.